What's going on, guys? Andrew Bruising Board Games, and man, that intro got me hyped. Today we're doing something special. We are taking a look at some DIY terrain for Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. Back when I was playing the game a bunch, I was looking to make my game pop a little bit more. So I was looking online for some 3D terrain, and the only things I could find is like the stuff was expensive. It was some molds. You had to paint it as well. So it was just, the cost was not working for me. So I took an alternative route and I made my own. I went online, I found out how to do it. And so with Frosthaven about to deliver in the next few months, I thought what perfect time than to share this method with you guys. So I'm going to go over all the steps that you guys can do to do the same thing with your game. And the best part about it is it's not going to cost you that much. You don't need any kind of machinery, expensive tools. All it takes is a little bit of hand tools, some sweat, and some patience. So I'm going to teach you all the steps you need to do to make this exact thing for your table. And I got to add that little bit of, if I can do it, so can you. And the materials you are going to need for this project, besides the basics of pen, paper, scissors, a ruler, and a paintbrush, you are going to need a printer, insulation foam, an X-Acto knife, glue, Modpodge, and some paint. And that's pretty much it. Most of all that stuff I found right on Amazon online. The only thing you might need to go somewhere for is the insulation foam. I had to go to my local hardware store. It comes in these big sheets. So I used Home Depot. You might have something else closer to you that does have insulation foam, but that's basically it. Everything else I got right online. I'm going to put all the links to all that stuff in the description below. So feel free to scroll down, click on those links, and I'll link to exactly what I used for this project. So with that out of the way, let's get into the tutorial. Why don't you grab your brew and join me? I'll show you exactly how to do this stuff, and I hope you guys enjoy.
All right, so the first thing we need to do is make a template for the project. As you can see here, I have the printout already. You can find a link to this file in the description below. It's actually going to take you to a Board Game Geek page. You're going to download that file. It's going to be a folder. Once you download the folder, you're going to open it up and you're going to look for the file inside of that folder called single. Open that up, and when you go to print it, you have to increase the print scale to 150%. That is going to match the Gloomhaven size. After you print that out, you're going to have this sheet of paper just like I did, and now we're going to have to cut out our templates. I'm going to cut out two different templates here. One's going to be a 3x3, which is what I'm cutting out right now, and then we're going to make a 1x3. All right, and here we have our first design. I know the shape looks a little bit funky, but with that cutout, it's going to allow us to lock in other terrain into that space so it doesn't slide around as much. After that, you want to take your knife, whatever you're using. I'm using an Olfa 5003. I'll put a link in the description below. I got this knife off Amazon for under 10 bucks. It's a fantastic knife. So you want to take your knife, and the holes that I'm digging out right here, you want to find where the lines connect, because we're going to have to transfer this to our insulation foam, and in order to do that, we're going to need to draw lines, and we're going to need to connect those lines using these dots. And once you're finished, you can see that I have all these little holes on the actual template. So all I'm going to do now is take a pen. This is going to be a thicker ballpoint pen, and I'm just going to twist inside of those holes just to make them a tad bit bigger. All right, so with that one done, we are going to now cut out our 1x3 template. So just an important note, when you are cutting out these templates, you want to make the lines as straight as possible and as clean as possible. The reason being, this is going to be your template for the whole project. If the template is off, all your pieces that use this template are going to be off as well. So again, just try to make the cuts as clean and as straight as possible. And we are also going to need some single tiles as well as some 1x2s in order to finish any kind of setup that this scenario calls for. However, we can still use this 1x3 template to make those other designs. So something that I did is I transferred mine onto a slightly thicker sheet of paper. What this is going to do, it's going to increase the longevity of our template. We are going to be using these templates a ton for tracing. So over time, those corners can get banged up a little bit. So transferring it onto a slightly thicker sheet of paper is really going to help us out. And I'm just using a cover page for some printer paper. You can use whatever you have lying around, to be honest, just as long as it's a little bit thicker than that regular sheet of paper. And here I have both of my template cutouts transferred, and I'm just going to use a Gloomhaven board just to double check my templates. As you can see here, you want to do that every so often just to make sure you're still on the right track. Also, if you do transfer it onto another sheet of paper, you want to make sure to transfer those dots that we made in the center of that bigger template as well. Alright, next up we have the insulation foam. I used Owens Corning 1/2 inch thick pink insulation foam. I got this stuff from Home Depot. It came in a large sheet. However, at the time of this recording, I did see you can get this stuff on Amazon. It comes in these smaller sheets, which might be really nice. When it comes, it might have this plastic film on there. You just want to peel this stuff right off. You're not going to need this. And with our sheet ready to go, we just want to take out our templates, and we're just going to be making traces directly onto this insulation foam. I'm going to place this as close to the edges as I feel comfortable with. That's going to allow us to make the most amount of traces with this one piece of material. And a quick note about this pen that I'm using here. This pen has more of a rounder tip. You want to try to avoid using something with too sharp of a tip. If you do, it has the potential to puncture through the insulation foam, and you might not be able to see the lines as clearly. With something with a little bit more round tip, it's not going to puncture as easily, and you're going to be able to see the lines pretty well. If you do use something with a sharp tip, that's fine. You might just have to go over the lines a few times, but it should still do the job fine. And you also just want to make sure you use the pen, put it right through those holes that we made in the template, and just turn that pen around a little bit. We want to be able to see those dots on the insulation foam after we remove our template. And there we go. First trace has been completed. We're just going to put this template back on there, and we are just going to make a bunch of these traces going all the way up the material. And now we have a full row of traces. If you miss a line or a dot, no problem. Just put the template back on there and you can redo that. Now, we can also redo that template going all the way up this board. And for a full terrain set, you're going to need to do that a few times. You're going to need to make a bunch of these shapes. However, for this tutorial, I'm only going to do one row of this shape, and then I'm going to put the 1x3s going all the way up this row as well, just to kind of show you how to do it. But when you do it again, you're going to need a lot more traces than I am making here. And there we go. We have a bunch of each pattern. Now we're just going to move on to adding texture to these tiles. So the type of terrain I went for when I made mine, as well as what I'm doing for this tutorial, we're going for a brick rock dungeon type feel. So to make that, we are going to take some regular Reynolds wrap aluminum foil, and we're going to rip off a huge sheet of this. We're going to take enough to bundle this up into a sort of ball. So as you can see here, I ripped off a huge piece, and I'm just kind of rolling this up to make a type of roller. You can make a ball out of this stuff that works just as well. I'm just making this roller so I can encompass all of these traces with kind of one sheet of aluminum foil. But again, you could just roll this up into a ball. That will work absolutely fine. So when you're crushing this thing up too, you want to make it kind of tight, and you don't want to make it as even as you can. You kind of want some bits sticking out more than others. You want an uneven look, because when we start rolling this, it's going to give us a feeling of, you know, some parts of the terrain are more indented, some are sticking out a little bit more, as you can see here. And we're just going to keep rolling this thing around. You just want to make sure you hit all of the surfaces. Just have fun with this step. Just keep on rolling. Maybe push your hand down on one side a little bit more at times, and then switch it up to the other. We're just going for an uneven, rocky dungeon type feel. So it's not going to be perfect. We want that feeling of a dark, rubble type dungeon. And now with our piece textured, we're going to take our pen and we're going to draw lines on our pattern so we can differentiate the hexes. You could also do this step before you did the texture if it's easier for you, but for me it really didn't matter, so I just did it afterwards. Also, you can see here I'm not using a ruler to make these lines. For me, the distance wasn't that great, so I could just freehand this, but if it makes it easier for you to use a ruler, by all means do so. All right, and all of our lines are now drawn, except that one. I know you guys see it. How much is that bothering you right now? Don't worry, I will pick it up later, I promise. So now we're just going to take our knife and we are going to cut these out, but we're not going to be intricate with it. We're just going to cut out the shapes in a bulk size, just to remove them from this larger insulation foam board. After we do that and we have our individual pieces, then we'll cut all the lines and we'll get intricate with the cuts. All right, and here we have all of our cuts. The next step is going to be to take our knife and then we'll cut on the lines, getting precise, allowing our shapes to really take form. All right, now for the precise cuts. So we're just going to take our knife and we're just going to carefully go over those lines. Now I want to spend a second here talking about this. First off, you want to make sure the blade that you're using for the knife is really sharp. That's going to really help you out. Also, when you are making these cuts, I am not going straight down on these lines. I am angling the knife slightly that it is turning into the shape itself. So the further I go down, the closer it's going to go towards the middle. The reason being is because only the tops of these shapes is going to be showing. That's where we made our lines, and that is what's going to show on top when it connects to the other pieces. If we make these cuts straight down, we have the chance that part of the bottom of the shape is going to stick out a little bit further than these lines itself. So when you go to place it up against another piece, if the bottom is sticking out, it might give you a gap on the top, and we don't want that. So angling these cuts inward and down is going to allow us to cut off the bottom, avoiding the possibility for the bottom to stick out. Alright, and as you can see, we cut out some of our 1x3 tiles as well. Now I'm going to use these other 3 to show you what I was talking about before, that you can use these 1x3s to create single tiles as well as 1x2s, because you are going to need some of those shapes to finish some of the scenario setups. So you are going to need a lot more than what I'm going to do here. Again, I'm just using this amount for tutorial purposes, so when you go to make yours, just make a lot more than I'm doing now. And as you can see, I'm literally just cutting along one of the lines, and now we have a single as well as a double. And here we have all of our cuts. I'm just going to take a few of these pieces and put them together just to make sure everything looks good. You might have some of these small gaps in between the pieces. It's bound to happen when you're dealing with this many cuts. It's going to be fine. As long as the gaps aren't glaring and they're huge, it's going to look fine, I promise. Alright, now what we need to do is deepen the inside lines of our tiles. And the reason is because we're going to add a layer of Modpodge and a few layers of paint onto these tiles. And if we do that and we don't deepen these lines, those lines are going to get lost. We also want each hex to have a 3D element so it stands out a little bit more, and this is going to help with that. And to do that, we're going to take our knife here and we're going to make shallow cuts on each of these lines. Because after that, we're going to take a pen and we're going to go through each of these lines again. You don't want to take your pen straight to these lines first without doing these cuts, because if you do, when you go down the line, the insulation foam is going to catch on that pen and it's going to tear a little bit of it up. So we want the lines a little cleaner than that. And to do that, we're just going to make real shallow cuts on the lines, following it up with the pen. And once you finish doing that to each of the tiles, now we can have a little bit of fun. We're going to give each of our tiles a little bit of character. And to do that, we're just going to take our pen here and we're just going to start making gashes, lines, gouging out some stuff and ripping stuff apart. That is because if you think about nature and some broken down rubble and concrete and bricks, there's going to be some chips here, some cracks. So we're trying to mimic that, what you see. We want, again, that abandoned dark dungeon that's made up of rocks, bricks, rubble, whatever. So we need to try to make that on our tiles. And to do that, again, in no rhyme or reason, just start gouging stuff out. Make lines between multiple hexes. Rip off a piece here, chip off a piece there. It doesn't matter. Anything's going to give it a little bit of character. You're not trying to be precise here. We're going for a little more chaotic and broken down. So just have fun here. Just do whatever you want. And here we have our design pieces. Now we're just going to move on to making the bricks to make up the walls for our terrain. And to do that, we're just going to take a new piece of insulation foam. I'm going to use a ruler here, and then I'm just going to make markings going up the sides at 3/8 of an inch. And then we're going to do that to the other side as well, which is going to allow us to then use our ruler, connect those lines to make long strips of 3/8 of an inch. And it should now look something like this. The more rows you make of these, it's going to allow for more bricks to be made as well. So if you need to make more bricks in the future, just apply the same technique. Now we're also going to take our aluminum foil because we want to texture these bricks as well to match our floor terrain. So we're just going to take the aluminum foil and keep rolling all up and down this. We will also need to do the back as well. And now we just want to take our knife and cut along these lines. Again, you just want to make sure your blade is sharp for this process. Amazon does sell extra blades, so I highly recommend you pick them up. Having a sharp blade is going to make the cuts a lot easier. And if the cuts are a lot easier, it's going to allow you to cut straighter. So definitely you just want to make sure your blade is sharp. And here we have our first piece. We're eventually going to make multiple cuts in these strips to make our bricks. And just note, the height of our bricks is 3/8 of an inch. That's what I went with. For me, it was fine. You can use something smaller to give it a slightly more natural scale when compared to the minis for Gloomhaven. I didn't see it as a problem. I didn't want to get too thin because it's going to make it a little bit harder. I'm going to have to cut a lot more. So I just went with 3/8 of an inch. But you can definitely choose whichever size you want. And we are also going to keep our bricks at a 1/2 inch width using the full width of the insulation foam, which is a 1/2 inch. That way we don't have to make any more cuts. We can just cut off these strips, cut them down into bricks, and be done with it. And then we're just going to take our knife and I'm going to cut these into strips of 1 inch. I'm just going to take the knife here and just make multiple shallow cuts. That way, after we're done all of these shallow cuts, we can just take the piece and literally just break the pieces off with our hands. And don't feel like you have to get these cuts exact. You could cut a little under, a little over. Again, we're not going for perfect here. We're going for a little bit misshapen and broken down. And as well as when we break these bricks off from one another, one brick might take more of the material than the other, adding to a cool effect that we're going for. You're going to have to make a lot of bricks for this project. A lot more than what I'm making here. And to store them all, I just took an old tub, just put them all in there. And now to make the wall. I'm using one of each of these sizes, but again, when you make yours, you're going to need to make a lot of walls on each of these sizes. That's what I use for mine and it seemed to work out. And what we're going to use to glue the bricks together is just some PVA glue. I got this from Amazon. Again, I'll put a link in the description below. And when you're designing these walls, you want to try to avoid going over 3 layers high. Occasionally I went with like a 4th layer high brick. Some wall sections only had 2 layers high. And the reason is because when you're dealing with small minis and this kind of 3D terrain, you want to be able to see over top of the terrain. You don't want anything too high or else you're going to have to lean over to look at the mini if it's close to the wall. And I would also say, have fun on this step. The bricks don't have to be perfect, like touching each other. They can be askewed and offset a little bit. That's the look that I'm going for, a abandoned, broken down dungeon. So I'm going to make the bricks resemble that. I don't want a perfect wall. Now when you're making the wall on the single tile or the pillar, you just want to take 2 bricks and glue them side by side, and then we're just going to rotate the orientation as we go up the layers. And once we're done gluing all of our pieces, we're just going to give these about 24 hours to dry. And once dry, what I decided to do with mine was take a knife to some of these edges. I'm just going to gash out some of these corners. I'm going to dig into some of the inside wall. Again, I'm just going for a worn out, abandoned look. So just doing this to a few of the pieces is really going to give us that look and feel. You don't have to go overboard with this. You don't have to do it to every single piece, but just doing some here and there is really going to give it some character. Again, you can get creative with this part. You know, cut off the entire middle brick if you want to, half of the middle brick. Do a big gouge out of the inside brick. Whatever you want to do, just make the pieces a little bit different so it doesn't look uniform and structured. The next thing we want to do is coat our pieces in a sealant. This is going to give them a little bit of structural integrity. It's going to make them a little harder. And to do that, we are going to be using this Modpodge right here. This is a water-based glue. Again, I'm going to put a link to the description. I got this from Amazon. It is not expensive at all. And also, because our pieces, all of our terrain, we want to make it look like rock and rubble, we want to put a base coat on it of black as well. So I'm just using regular black acrylic paint. It is nothing expensive, and we're just going to mix these two up. The ratio of black paint to Mod Podge mixture isn't exact. You just want to put enough black paint in there to make this whole entire mixture pretty dark. Now you just want to take your paintbrush, and we're going to coat all of our pieces in this black Mod Podge mix. You want to make sure you're getting all those cracks and crevices, anything that you can find. If you have to dab your paintbrush inside of places, so be it. You just want to make sure you hit all of those little spaces. Also, you don't have to get the underside of the pieces. That part won't be showing, but you do want to make sure you get the sides as well. Also, if you have to do a few layers of this, just do a layer, let it dry, and then hit it again. And once you're done all of your pieces, you just want to make sure you let them sit out for around 24 hours so they can dry. And next is the painting. We're only going to be using 3 different colors here: black, white, and yellow. These are just some cheap acrylic paints that you can pick up at your local craft store, or you might even have laying around your house. They don't need to be anything special. Any kind of cheap acrylic paint you have lying around will do. And we're just going to take our paints and we're going to make 2 separate piles of mixed paint. We're going for layers here. So one pile is going to be more dark, but a little bit lighter than the black. It's going to be mostly a dark gray. And then the next pile is going to be a light gray. And then we're going to add a touch of yellow to each of those piles. The yellow is going to add a little bit more of a natural look instead of just using shades of gray. But you could certainly just stick with shades of gray and your piece would still look good. And when we go to paint these, we're going to use a technique called dry brushing. We're going to take a dry paintbrush and we're going to get a little bit of paint on the end of this brush. We don't want to put a lot of paint onto here, because what we're going to do, we're going to essentially be lightly moving the brush across the piece. You're almost just pulling it down. You don't want to put the full brush on there. You just want to get the tip of the brush and in gentle motions slide the brush over the piece. We're going to be starting with the dark gray and then moving into the light gray, and this is going to allow us to form our layers. So we don't want to douse the whole piece in the colors. We just want to do this dry brushing technique to give it depth. And right after our first layer is done, we're just going to move right over into the next using the lighter gray. And we're just going to apply the same dry brushing technique. Just get a little bit of paint on the brush and just do light strokes all the way across the piece. And remember, we do want to get the sides as well. And here we finished our layer with the light gray. I did also want to show though, if we keep taking that same light gray and going around over the piece, you can see how if you go over top of places that you've already done with just a tad bit more paint, it will make that piece pop a little bit more. I suggest doing that. I did it for mine. So after you've done your first layer of light gray, again, maybe just put a little bit more on the paint and go over some of those spots again. And finally, we're going to take some white paint. We're not going to mix it around with anything. And we're just going to apply the same dry brushing technique, mainly hitting the edges of the piece, just to make them stick out a little bit more. All right, and there we go, a finished piece. As you can see, it looks pretty good, and we're just going to apply this same technique to all of our pieces. Now after you're done painting, you could be entirely done. For me, I wanted to add a little bit of grass to the dungeon terrain and make it stand out a little bit more, to give it a little bit of color. So to do that, I just used some static grass. This is some Gale Force 9 miniatures static grass. And I also am using some Army Painter Swamp Tufts. And to put this stuff on, we're just going to use the same PVA glue, and we're just going to put it in places where we want the grass to stick. You could also use a paintbrush to paint on some of the glue to avoid going overboard with the glue as well. And after you've put on the grass, just give it a little bit of a pat down, give it some time to dry, and then just wipe away the excess. And after they've dried and you've wiped off any extra grass, your pieces should look something like this. I'm really happy with the way that these turned out. I've saved a bunch of money, and it's cool just knowing when you're playing the game you made this terrain.
And there you guys go. Some badass dungeon terrain for Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. Something that doesn't cost a lot of money, and it's something that you can be proud of when you bust it out to the table. Now, one more step that I did to mine, and what I would suggest you guys doing, is I bought this Minwax polyurethane clear satin. Give everything a nice spray coat in this stuff. This is going to harden it up a little bit, make it a little bit tougher. It's just going to protect all of your terrain for a little bit longer, and you really want that, especially after you've done a lot of hard work to this. And I'll put a link in the description below. Past that, I'm really happy with the way that this turned out. This was a first for me. Like I said, I went online and I found little steps on how to do it, and I just put all of that together to kind of create my own stuff. And I'm really happy with the way it turned out, like I said. Just get creative with this stuff. It's going to be a little bit of a learning process. It might take some time to get exactly what you want, but keep at it. I promise you it's going to turn out. And past that, just get creative with it. You know, use your imagination. For me, I added some touches of I did some blood spatter here on like some of the walls and some of the floors. I added some claw marks, you know, like they're gouging out some of the rocks, like it's some sort of monster coming through. I did that to a few of the things. I added like this little altar here, which is pretty cool. I was really happy about that. I added a little chest that I made as well. And I added some of these doors that were really easy to make. Just do whatever you want to. You don't need to do all the grass. I think it looks cool. But again, just do whatever you want. This is your project, right? Just have fun with this. Now, one extra cool thing that I did for mine, when I made all of this stuff initially, I wanted two different types of terrain, right? I wanted the dungeon. Initially, I was going to go for all the types that I saw in Gloomhaven, and then I was going to try to make some snow, ice stuff for Frosthaven coming up. But when I made this, I didn't want a ton of pieces. So what I did, I actually made all of the floors double-sided, and I put wooden texture on the bottom. I made it look like a wooden floor, and that is on every single one of these. It has this wooden floor texture, so you could just flip it over, and now you have some wooden floors that you can play on as well. So it was a lot harder than just doing the technique that I showed you, because if you remember the one step in there where I said, when you're cutting these tiles, angle the knife down, because only the top is going to line up, right? So if the bottom is sticking out a little bit, it has the potential to create gaps if it's sticking out a lot further than the top. However, for this, since I had to flip these over and they had to line up perfectly as well, I had to cut these straight down. So a lot of times what I was doing after I was done cutting down straight, I had to constantly be taking these and lining them up in all the angles just to make, and then flipping them over and doing the same thing just to make sure when they were flipped that they were still lining up. But it paid off. I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. Again, just this whole project has been a fun experience, and I can't wait to get out there and try other different types of terrains. So that's going to be it. If you guys have any questions, and please let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer anything. And I really encourage you guys, if you guys are looking for some sort of terrain, you can apply some of these steps even if it's not for Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. The same kind of steps will apply. So again, I hope you guys have enjoyed. I'll put a link to all the stuff I use in the description below. And until I see you guys again, make sure to drink some brews, play some games, and get out there and be creative. All right, guys. See ya.